What if I told you there was an engine so powerful, so advanced, and so utterly dominant that NASCAR literally changed their rules just to kill it? An engine that cost Ford over $10 million to develop in 1964 money. That's about $100 million today, and only saw action for 6 months before being banned forever. 427 cubic inches, single overhead cams, 657 horsepower with a single 4-barrel carburetor, 780 horsepower with dual quads. This is the story of Ford's SOHC 427 Cammer, the engine that was too good for its own survival. Picture this. It's February 1965 at Daytona. Ford's brand new Galaxies roll onto the track with an engine nobody's ever seen before. The sound alone was different, a higher, angrier scream than the traditional pushrod V8 rumble everyone knew. When qualifying ended, Ford had taken 12 of the top 15 positions. The racing world had never seen anything like it. Within months, this engine would be outlawed, triggering one of the nastiest political battles in motorsports history and forcing Ford to abandon NASCAR entirely for several years. The Ford SOHC 427 wasn't just another racing engine. It was a deliberate nuclear strike in the escalating war between Ford and Chrysler, an engineering masterpiece that pushed 1960s technology to its absolute limits, and ultimately a cautionary tale about what happens when you build something too perfect for the world it has to compete in. To understand why Ford built this mechanical monster, we need to travel back to 1963. NASCAR was experiencing its first golden age. Television coverage was expanding. Attendance was exploding. And most importantly for manufacturers, there was real truth to the phrase, win on Sunday, sell on Monday. Racing success directly translated to showroom sales, and everyone knew it. The early 1960s NASCAR scene was dominated by big block pushrod V8s. Chevrolet had their 409. Pontiac was running their Super Duty 421. Ford was competitive with their 427 FEE series. These were all conventional overhead valve engines with camshafts in the block, push rods, and rocker arms operating the valves. It was proven technology, relatively simple, and everyone understood the formula. But in 1964, Chrysler dropped a bomb that changed everything. The 426 Hemi was Chrysler's secret weapon, technically introduced in 1964 but perfected for the 1965 season. This engine featured hemispherical combustion chambers that allowed for massive valves and incredible breathing. The street version was rated at 425 horsepower, but the race motors were pushing well over 500. At the 1964 Daytona 500, Richard Petty's Hemi-powered Plymouth lapped the entire field twice. Chrysler won 26 of 62 races that season. Ford executives were not just worried, they were humiliated. Here's where things get interesting. Ford couldn't just build another pushrod engine and hope to compete. The Hemi's hemispherical heads gave it an inherent advantage in breathing and combustion efficiency. Ford needed something revolutionary, something that would leapfrog Chrysler's technology entirely. The solution came from an unexpected source: Ford's involvement in Indianapolis racing. Ford had been developing a 4-cam Indy V8 engine that featured dual overhead camshafts per cylinder bank. This wasn't new technology. Overhead cams had been used in racing since before World War I, but nobody had successfully applied it to NASCAR's big block formula. The engineering challenges were immense. The timing chains alone would be a nightmare. The heads would be massive. The whole package would be tall, heavy, and complex. Ford's engineers looked at these challenges and said, let's do it anyway. The development program began in secret in late 1963. Ford assembled a team of their best engineers, including Jim Guthrie and Bill Gay, gave them an essentially unlimited budget, and told them to build something that would embarrass Chrysler. The project name was Special Racing Engine, and deliberately vague to maintain secrecy. What they created was nothing short of revolutionary for American motorsports. Let me paint you a picture of what made this engine so special. Start with the block. A modified version of Ford's existing 427 FE, but strengthened with thicker main bearing webs and cross-bolted main caps. This wasn't exotic. It was the foundation that would support the insanity above it. The bore was 4.223 inches, the stroke 3.78 inches, giving exactly 427 cubic inches to meet NASCAR's displacement limit. But the magic happened from the camshaft up. Instead of a single camshaft in the block operating valves through push rods and rockers, the SOHC had one camshaft per cylinder head, positioned directly above the valves. Each cam was driven by a 6-foot-long roller chain. Yes, 6 feet of chain per side. That had to be precisely tensioned and controlled. The chains alone added 35 pounds to the engine, but the benefits were extraordinary. With the camshaft directly above the valves, Ford could eliminate push rods and conventional rocker arms entirely. The cam lobes operated the valves through simple roller finger followers. This meant less reciprocating mass, more precise valve timing, and the ability to rev higher than any pushrod engine could dream of. While the Hemi was hitting valve float at 6,800 RPM, the Cammer was still pulling hard at 7,500. The valve sizes were massive for the era. 2.195-inch intakes and 1.73-inch exhausts. The ports were designed using the latest flow bench technology, shaped for maximum velocity and minimum turbulence. The combustion chambers weren't hemispherical like Chrysler's, but a modified wedge design that Ford claimed was actually more efficient. With a compression ratio of 12.5.1 for racing applications, this engine demanded the highest octane fuel available. Here's where the numbers get truly insane. With a single Holley, 850 CFM, 4-barrel carburetor, and relatively mild tuning, the SOHC made 616 horsepower at 7,000 RPM and 515 lb-ft of torque at 3,800 RPM. That was on the conservative end. With dual quads and aggressive tuning, dyno tests showed peaks of 780 horsepower. Some drag racing versions with experimental fuel injection supposedly touched 800. Remember, this was 1964. The average passenger car made about 200 horsepower. The most powerful production car you could buy, the Chevrolet Corvette, with the L84 fuel-injected 327, made 375 horsepower. The first race engines were assembled in December 1964. Ford built them in a special clean room at their Dearborn engine plant, with each engine hand-assembled by a single technician who signed his work. The attention to detail was obsessive. Every component was measured, balanced, and blueprinted. The timing chains were pre-stretched on special fixtures. The valve springs were tested individually. Each completed engine underwent 8 hours of dyno testing before being approved for racing. The cost was astronomical. Each complete engine cost approximately $3,000 in 1964. That's about $30,000 today. But that was just the purchase price. The development program had consumed over $10 million. Ford was essentially selling these engines at a massive loss, subsidizing their racing teams as part of their total performance marketing campaign. When the SOHC Cammer debuted at Daytona in February 1965, it was like bringing a gun to a knife fight. Fred Lorenzen's pole position speed was 171.151 mph, nearly 3 mph faster than the previous record. Ford drivers occupied 7 of the top 10 starting positions. During the race, the Cammer-powered cars were visibly faster on the straights, pulling away from the Hemis like they were standing still. But here's where things went sideways. NASCAR's founder, Bill France, had a problem. The sport was supposed to be about stock cars, vehicles that had some connection to what people could buy at dealerships. The Hemi was already pushing that definition, but at least Chrysler sold a handful of street Hemis to maintain the fiction. Ford's SOHC engine wasn't even pretending to be a production motor. It was a pure racing engine, and everyone knew it. On April 6, 1965, NASCAR announced new rules for the 1966 season. Any engine using overhead cams would be limited to 305 cubic inches. Any engine with hemispherical combustion chambers would be limited to 405 cubic inches. But pushrod engines with wedge chambers, they could run the full 430 cubic inches. The math was simple. This killed the Cammer and severely handicapped the Hemi. Ford was furious. They'd spent millions developing this engine specifically for NASCAR, following all existing rules, only to have it legislated out of existence after just a few months. Henry Ford II himself got involved, threatening to withdraw from NASCAR entirely. Chrysler was almost as angry about the Hemi restrictions. Both manufacturers screamed that France was playing favorites with Chevrolet, whose conventional big blocks benefited from the new rules. The political battle was vicious. Ford boycotted several NASCAR races in 1965. They ran full-page newspaper ads accusing NASCAR of changing rules to penalize innovation. France countered that he was trying to keep costs under control and maintain relevance to production vehicles. Behind the scenes, it was even uglier. There were threats of lawsuits, attempts to form rival racing series, and personal attacks that poisoned relationships for years. But Ford wasn't giving up on their engine. If NASCAR didn't want it, they'd find other venues. The SOHC Cammer found a second life in drag racing, where it became absolutely dominant. The engine's ability to rev high and make power throughout the RPM range made it perfect for quarter-mile warfare. Mickey Thompson was one of the first to see the potential, dropping a Cammer into his Mustang funny car and immediately resetting elapsed time records. In NHRA competition, the Cammer became the engine to beat. Connie Kalitta, known as the Bounty Hunter, terrorized strips across America with his Cammer-powered top-fuel dragster. The engine adapted beautifully to nitromethane fuel, with some versions supposedly making over 2,500 horsepower. Though measuring power at those levels in the 1960s was more art than science, the marine racing world also embraced the Cammer. Offshore powerboat racers loved its combination of power and reliability. With proper cooling and maintenance, these engines could run at full throttle for hours, something that would destroy lesser motors. Several speed records were set with Cammer power, including Don Pruitt's 200 Pornfree 419 mph, run at Bonneville in a streamliner. The technical legacy of the SOHC 427 extended far beyond its racing success. This engine proved that overhead cam technology could work in large displacement American V8s, paving the way for future designs. When Ford developed their modular engine family in the 1990s with SSOHC and DOHC variants, they were building on lessons learned from the Cammer. The 5.4L DOHC V8 in the Ford GT supercar is a direct descendant of that original concept. The timing chain system, initially seen as the engine's Achilles heel, actually proved remarkably reliable when properly maintained. Ford developed special chain tensioners and guides that kept the chains under control even at sustained high RPM. This technology influenced chain-driven cam systems for decades afterward. Modern engines like BMW's N63 V8 use similar principles, just with better materials and tighter tolerances. Production numbers for the SOHC 427 are surprisingly difficult to pin down. Ford officially built somewhere between 650 and 50 complete engines, though some historians argue the number could be higher if you count spare blocks and heads separately. What we do know is that Ford continued producing parts through 1967, and complete engines were still available from Ford Performance Parts into the early 1970s. Today, an original SOHC 427 Cammer is one of the holy grails of American muscle car engines. Complete running examples sell for $40,000 to $60,000 when they occasionally appear at auction, but finding one is the challenge. Most were destroyed in racing accidents or worn out from competition use. Many surviving examples have been rebuilt so many times that few original parts remain. The restoration and replica market for these engines is surprisingly strong. Several companies manufacture reproduction blocks, heads, and timing components. A complete reproduction Cammer can be built for around $25,000. Still expensive, but attainable for serious enthusiasts. These modern versions often incorporate improvements like better metallurgy and modern valve train components, making them more reliable than the originals while maintaining the authentic appearance and sound. Let's talk about that sound for a moment. The SOHC 427 had a unique acoustic signature that racing fans could identify immediately. The combination of the radical valve timing, the gear-driven cam within each head, and the long timing chains created a mechanical symphony unlike any other American V8. It was higher pitched than a traditional pushrod engine, but rougher than a European overhead cam motor. Drag racers said it sounded like controlled violence, which was probably accurate. The engineering problems Ford solved while developing this engine were remarkable for the era. The valve A springs, for instance, required special metallurgy to handle the stress of 7,500 RPM operation. Ford worked with spring manufacturers to develop a new alloy that could maintain tension without fatiguing. These springs were so advanced that other manufacturers bought them for their own racing programs. Oil control was another major challenge. The overhead cam design meant oil had to be pumped to the top of the engine, lubricate the cams and valves, then drain back to the pan without pooling or aerating. Ford developed a sophisticated oiling system with dedicated drain-back passages and windage trays. The oil pump itself was a high-volume unit that could move 12 gallons per minute at full RPM, enough to drain the oil pan in seconds if something went wrong. The cooling system was equally impressive. Racing versions used special high-flow water pumps and oversized radiators. The heads had carefully designed water jackets that directed coolant to the hottest areas first, particularly around the exhaust valves. Some teams experimented with reverse flow cooling, where cool water entered at the heads rather than the block, though this remained experimental. But perhaps the most impressive aspect of the SOHC 427 was its untapped potential. Ford engineers believed they'd only scratched the surface of what the design could achieve. Internal documents from the period discuss experimental versions with 4 valves per cylinder, dual overhead cams per bank, and even fuel injection. One prototype supposedly made 850 horsepower naturally aspirated, though it was too fragile for racing. There were turbocharged experiments too. Ford engineers fitted a single A research turbocharger to a destroked 406 cubic inch version for Bonneville's speed record attempts. With 15 psi of boost, this engine reportedly made over 1,000 horsepower on gasoline. Absolutely mind-blowing for 1966. The project was abandoned when Ford withdrew from racing, but it showed the platform's potential. The impact on Ford's racing program was profound and lasting. The NASCAR ban and subsequent political battles soured relationships for years. Ford did return to NASCAR, but never with the same innovative fervor. They played it safe, running conventional pushrod engines that followed the spirit and letter of the rules. The days of radical innovation were over. Some historians argue the camera's ban marked the end of true technological competition in NASCAR. After 1965, the rules became increasingly restrictive, mandating specific technologies rather than setting performance limits and letting engineers innovate. Today's NASCAR engines are essentially spec motors, all very similar in design and performance. The Wild West days of dropping experimental engines into stock cars died with the Camry. The broader impact on American automotive engineering is harder to quantify, but equally significant. The SOHC 427 proved that American engineers could match anyone in the world for technical innovation. This wasn't just a big, crude pushrod motor winning through brute force. It was a sophisticated, technically advanced engine that incorporated genuine engineering innovation. It helped kill the stereotype that American engines were all displacement and no sophistication. Ford learned valuable lessons about motorsports politics, too. The Camry experience taught them that having the best technology wasn't enough. You needed political savvy and rules stability to succeed in racing. This influenced Ford's approach to everything from Trans Am to Le Mans. They became much more careful about understanding and influencing rules before committing to expensive development programs. The story also highlights a fascinating period in automotive history when manufacturers would spend millions on radical engineering projects just to win races and sell cars. The total performance era, roughly 1960 to 1970, saw more innovation in American performance engines than perhaps any period before or since. The SOHC 427 was both a product of this era and one of the reasons it ended. proving that unlimited development was unsustainable. Looking at modern motorsports, you can see echoes of the camera controversy everywhere. Formula One constantly adjusts rules to prevent single-team domination. NASCAR has become even more restrictive, with essentially spec engines in bodies. The lesson learned from the SOHC 427, that overwhelming technical superiority kills competition, influences every major racing series today. But here's the thing about the Ford SOHC 427. Camera, it represents something pure about human nature and engineering. A group of talented people were given a problem, nearly unlimited resources, and permission to innovate without restriction. What they created was so good it had to be banned. In a world of compromise and regulation, there's something beautiful about an engine that was simply too perfect for its own good. The Camry remains a testament to what's possible when engineers are unleashed. It wasn't just an engine, it was a statement. Ford basically said, yeah, you want to see what we can really do? Here it is. The fact that it was banned almost adds to its legend. This wasn't defeated on the track. It was legislated out of existence because nothing else could touch it. Every time I read about this engine, I'm struck by the audacity of it all. Ford took existing NASCAR rules, found no prohibition against overhead cams, and built something that redefined what was possible. They didn't bend the rules. They revealed that the rules were inadequate for containing human innovation. That's a powerful statement about engineering creativity. Modern Ford performance still occasionally references the Camry in their marketing, understanding its mythical status among enthusiasts. When they developed the 5.2L Voodoo engine for the Shelby GT350, they specifically mentioned the Camry as inspiration. The Voodoo's flat plane crank and 8,250 RPM redline were attempts to capture that same high-revving, technically advanced spirit. The collector market for Camry-powered vehicles is fascinating. While original NASCAR racers are essentially priceless museum pieces, the drag cars and modified street machines occasionally surface. A genuine Camry-powered 1965 Mustang funny car sold at Mecum for $275,000. Even reproduction Camry engines command premium prices, with builders reporting year-long waiting lists. There's also a thriving community of Camry enthusiasts who share technical information, source parts, and help each other keep these engines running. The SOHC Ford Forum has thousands of members worldwide, from guys running them in vintage drag cars to marine racers still setting records. The knowledge base these enthusiasts have accumulated is remarkable, probably exceeding what Ford itself retained. What really strikes me is how the Camry represents a fork in the road for American performance engines. Had it been allowed to compete and evolve, would overhead cam technology have become standard in American muscle cars decades earlier? Would we have seen a technological arms race between Ford, Chrysler, and GM that pushed engine development even further? We'll never know, but it's fascinating to consider. The SOHC 427 also serves as a reminder that racing improves the breed only when rules allow innovation. Modern NASCAR's spec engine formula might create close racing, but it doesn't advance technology. The Camry was born from competition without arbitrary limits, and it pushed boundaries we're still exploring today. In the end, the Ford SOHC 427 Camry wasn't just an engine that broke NASCAR. It broke the entire concept of production-based racing. It forced a reckoning about what stock car racing should be. A showcase for innovation or a test of driver skill with roughly equal equipment. NASCAR chose the latter path, and while that decision has its merits, we lost something when engines like the Camry were banned. This engine stands as perhaps the ultimate what if in American motorsports history. What if it had been allowed to compete and evolve? What if Ford had been able to develop those 4-valve heads and fuel injection systems? What if overhead cam technology had become the standard for American performance in 1965 instead of waiting until the 1990s? But maybe that's what makes the Camry so special. It exists frozen in time as the ultimate expression of 1960s American racing engine technology. Too good to race, too expensive to produce, too advanced for its era. It's a perfect symbol of the total performance era. ambitious, innovative, excessive, and ultimately unsustainable. The Ford SOHC 427 Camry didn't just break NASCAR. It broke the mold of what American engines could be. It proved that Detroit could innovate with the best in the world when motivated and funded. And most importantly, it reminded us that sometimes the best engineering solutions are the ones that make everyone else demand new rules. What's the most impressive band technology you've heard about in racing? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into one of racing's most controversial engines, make sure to subscribe for more stories about the machines that were too good for their own survival. Until next time, keep those engines running, overhead cams or not.